They called them replaceable workers, temporary labor, just part of the system. But now, in 2025, 10 nations across the world are realizing a painful truth. Life was better when Filipinos were there. They were the nurses who held dying patients' hands when no one else would, the engineers who kept oil fields running, the caregivers who treated the elderly like their own parents, the teachers who smiled even when their paychecks were late, and yet many countries thought they could simply send them home and carry on. They couldn't, because when the Filipinos left, something else left too: compassion, warmth, laughter, reliability. You can't replace that with machines, policies, or paperwork. You can't hire a new batch of kindness. 1. Kuwait, the empty homes of the wealthy. When Kuwait tightened its labor laws and restricted domestic workers, many wealthy households thought life would go on smoothly. But suddenly, homes fell silent. Families struggled with basic routines. The trust that had been built over decades with Filipino helpers vanished overnight. Employers started realizing that the loyalty and cleanliness, the care and dedication of Filipinos couldn't be found easily elsewhere. Within months, agencies reported an emotional void among families who lost their longtime kasambahay. By 2025, Kuwait began to quietly reopen its doors to Filipino workers, not because of politics, but out of necessity. 2. Saudi Arabia. The hospitals that felt empty. After controversies and stricter visa measures, Saudi Arabia saw thousands of Filipino nurses and medical workers return home. At first, the health system managed. But when COVID-19 aftershocks and post-pandemic shortages hit, hospitals realized just how irreplaceable Filipino staff had been. Patients noticed it too. Fewer smiles, longer waits, less empathy. In 2025, Saudi officials publicly acknowledged that their healthcare workforce had lost its heart. Today, they're quietly recruiting Filipino medical professionals again, not just for skills, but for their human touch. 3. Hong Kong. The Sundays became silent. When Hong Kong authorities tightened migration rules, suddenly the parks of Central went quiet on Sundays. No laughter, no karaoke, no sea of blue denim jackets and picnic mats. For decades, Filipino domestic workers turned Hong Kong's Sundays into a symbol of unity and joy. Their only day off became a citywide celebration of freedom and sisterhood. When the restrictions pushed thousands to return home, Hong Kong realized how much cultural life they had contributed. Even local businesses saw the impact: fewer sales in markets, less life in the streets. In 2025, some lawmakers even proposed a Migrant Appreciation Day, unofficially called Pinoy Sunday, in recognition of how much joy Filipinos brought. 4. Singapore. The care crisis. Singapore prides itself on efficiency, but when thousands of Filipino caregivers and helpers left after policy changes in 2023, a crisis quietly unfolded. Families scrambled to care for aging parents. Working couples struggled to balance careers with home life. Agencies reported rising demand and dwindling supply. Singapore realized that the Filipino presence wasn't just convenient. It was essential. They were the silent force behind Singapore's smooth daily life. By 2025, new programs were launched to bring Filipino caregivers back, with higher wages and better treatment. A rare national correction inspired by regret. 5. Italy. The empty churches. Italy once hosted thousands of Filipino caregivers, nannies, and nurses. They filled pews on Sundays, sang in choirs, and brought warmth to parishes across Rome, Milan, and Florence. But when Italy tightened its immigration rules, those same churches grew quieter. Priests noticed the missing joy. Even elderly Italians, once cared for by Filipina helpers, began asking for them by name. In 2025, the Italian government is now offering special visas again for domestic caregivers, a move locals call the compassion visa. Because they realized something profound: Filipinos weren't just workers, they were family. 6. Japan. The smiles that disappeared. Japan has always valued discipline, order, and precision. But in industries like caregiving and hospitality, something was missing: warmth. For a time, Japan limited foreign domestic work, thinking technology could replace humans. Robots were introduced in elderly care centers, but the elderly became more isolated. The laughter faded. Patients reported feeling lonely despite perfect service. When the pandemic years proved that empathy can't be programmed, Japan started bringing back Filipino caregivers in large numbers. In 2025, surveys show elderly patients saying, "When the Filipino nurse came back, I started smiling again." 7. Canada. The community gap. Canada once had thriving Filipino communities that kept towns and hospitals alive. But when new immigration measures made it harder for temporary workers to stay, many left. Small towns in Manitoba, Alberta, and Ontario began feeling emptier. Restaurants closed, healthcare staff dwindled, and even local festivals lost their volunteers. The Filipino community had quietly powered much of Canada's social and healthcare systems. Now, in 2025, the government is reversing course, creating new paths for permanent residency, admitting that the country backbone workers deserve to stay. 8. United Kingdom. The NHS without its angels. The UK's National Health Service once relied heavily on Filipino nurses, so much so that patients often said, "If you see a smiling nurse, she's probably Filipino." But after post-Brexit migration shifts, thousands went home or moved to other countries. The result? The NHS faced one of its worst staffing crises in history. In 2025, the UK Health Ministry openly admitted the loss, calling Filipino workers irreplaceable. They are now running targeted campaigns in Manila to bring them back, not out of pity, but out of gratitude and survival instinct. 9. Taiwan. The factories that stopped running. In Taiwan, Filipino factory workers were known for their speed, precision, and resilience. When tensions between labor groups and management led to stricter migration rules, factories struggled to maintain production. Machines can't replace people who work with pride. Taiwanese business owners, once dismissive, now travel personally to the Philippines to recruit again. In 2025, labor reports show that 40% of Taiwan's new factory workforce are returning Filipinos, a clear sign that some lessons are learned the hard way. 10. United Arab Emirates, the quiet city of dreams. Dubai, Abu Dhabi, glittering cities that run 24/7. But when thousands of Filipino service workers and professionals returned home in the early 2020s, locals noticed something strange. Malls were less lively, hotels felt colder, and workplaces became tense. Filipinos had been the soft glue holding together multicultural teams. Their humor, patience, and flexibility kept the energy alive. By 2025, UAE businesses are competing to hire back Filipino staff, recognizing that they were never just employees. They were the ones who kept the dream alive. Now, as 2025 unfolds, the world is realizing something powerful. When Filipinos go abroad, they don't just work. They heal, they lift, they humanize. They bring joy into cold offices, warmth into lonely homes, and unity into divided workplaces. And when nations decide to push them out, they soon discover that you can build buildings, run systems, and enforce laws. But you can't build soul without Filipinos. Because while other people may work for the job, Filipinos work with their heart, and that's what every nation that ever lost them now deeply regrets.